Welcome to Chromatic Counsel podcast, the podcast where law, leadership, and color collide. I'm your host, Kerry Heaps, and we have a great show lined up for you today. Just a quick announcement, if you are an attorney in the Florida or Texas jurisdiction, we have a class for CLE called Digital Tells that is duly accredited in both states. So if you're needing technology credit in Florida and MCLE credit in Texas, I hope you will join us. We have about 5 different classes this month, so check out, see which one fits into your schedule. And if none of them work, you can always get the recording. The link is in the show notes below, so you can check that out. And as always, if you're interested in being a guest on the show, there's also a link in the show notes for you to apply to be considered as a guest. And today I have a great show lined up for you today, and my guest is Chuck Krugel. He's a Chicago-based labor and employment attorney who has spent more than 25 years advising management-side employers on workplace strategy, compliance, and human behavior. Chuck is the founder of his own firm, representing small to mid-sized companies around the world, as well as labor unions, navigating complex transitions with a background in industrial organizational psychology and decades of experience negotiating, litigating, and counseling at the highest levels. Chuck brings a rare blend of legal precision and behavioral insight to the workplace. Chuck, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Kerry. Appreciate it.
I'm excited to have you on here. I think employment law is one of those sectors that really, unfortunately, it seems to be growing because there's so many things happening in the workplace. But I want to start first by talking about your academic path because you started in psychology before, I guess,
Sure.
going into law. How does that background shape the way you approach workplace conflict today?
It's helped me a lot with communication, leadership, understanding human behavior in the workplace, which is why I got into the field in the first place. I was interested in human behavior, especially in the workplace issues, disputes, things like that. I actually never intended to be an attorney. I was going to go into consulting, organizational behavior, but it was too soft and touchy-feely for me.
Yeah. So after 25 years running your own firm, what do you think is the most overlooked risk that small and medium-sized businesses face when it comes to human resources?
Bad hires. I see it all the time.
Mhm.
They don't have job descriptions for these positions. They don't have written policies or procedures. And then they end up making a bad hire and they overlook potentially better hires they could have made. And then I have to clean up a mess. It always costs a lot more. I don't know, maybe 3 times as much to clean up a mess at the back end of it than to do it right in the first place.
Mhm. And I really resonate with this because clearly prior to starting my own company back in the day, I worked in HR. I worked as for a staffing company, split desk. I recruited and I also did business development. And then before that, I worked at a construction company where that was part of my job was HR. And I also had to partake in that whole, hey, we're letting Susie Smith go today. We need you to be a witness, and and those were
Yeah.
never. I was like, you just know your day's not going to go well when you have to do those. So it does seem. Are you finding that more and more, like AI is kind of playing a little bit of a role in this too? Like maybe HR is becoming a little bit more reliant on AI to develop job descriptions, or do you think it's more in the human relation part of hiring, like the actual one-on-one interview, whether it's virtual or in person?
I'm starting to see AI creep more into it, especially when it comes to job descriptions, policies, things like that. So
Mhm.
I think a lot of businesses are relying on AI, and I think AI can be very effective. I mean, personally, I love it. I think AI is like the next, it's like the second coming of the internet. The internet was like one of the greatest things ever, and I think AI is going to be too.
Mhm.
But right now, it's still in its infancy, and just like social media was about 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's in its infancy, and I think it's got still a little bit of ways to go. But I think eventually we'll get there, and I think it will be a huge help for businesses, especially on the HR and being more proactive in terms of good hiring
Mhm.
practices.
So you've negotiated obviously hundreds of agreements and resolved so many disputes. What patterns are you seeing on like a repeat basis in workplace conflict?
Well, bad hires for one thing that leads to a lot of conflict. People, square pegs and round holes, that type of thing. And then also not paying attention to employees. I actually advise a lot of my clients to listen to gossip, workplace gossip, not that they have to foment it or participate, but keep
Yeah.
your ear to the ground and pay attention to gossip, especially early on. And then not, and you may not have to act on it, but keep abreast of it. Because I can't tell you how many times I've heard gossip that has eventually come true. Drugs, sex, things like that. So
Yeah, that's interesting. From your perspective, what separates an effective manager from those who unintentionally create legal exposure? Because I think HR plays a role, but then once they go to the hiring manager, they have their own boss or manager as well. It's almost like a multi-layered effect.
I think good managers are collaborative, and I think that's part of being a good leader too. And
Mhm,
they understand that you can't be one of the guys anymore, so to
mhm,
speak. That basically you have to kind of remain above the fray to an extent, or separate from the people you're supervising. Not that you have to be, above it all and unapproachable, but it's just not going to work out. You're not going to be great friends with them. You can be friends with them, I think, to an extent, but just not great friends. And I think I've seen too many mistakes in terms of communication. I'm dealing with an issue right now where a manager was talking about her red thong repeatedly in text
wow.
messages to others. So, just nonsense, stupid stuff like that.
And
Easily
I
avoidable too.
Yeah, and it makes me that actually flashes me back to I remember even being in staffing. I had a manager at one of the companies I worked with who she felt that we like Christmas time. Like she's like, okay, we're gonna close the office. We're all gonna I have to do my Christmas shopping. And I'm like, well, okay, go ahead and go. And she goes, no, I want everybody to go with me. She literally made all of us, all four of us go Christmas shopping with her. And I'm like, I have things to do. I have, you know what I mean? Like, I was so taken aback that she felt that that was okay. Like, sometimes you're right. It's stupid stuff that people do that, like, okay, now we have a problem, you know?
Prayer circles. I actually had a boss of mine because I used to work in HR. And that
Hmm.
once I had a boss who had prayer circles. Now, she didn't include me because I'm
Hmm.
not Catholic, but she had these prayer circles. And it's pretty, I heard about it from others in my department. It was really weird.
Hmm. Do
I
you think
eventually ended up, by the way, I eventually ended up writing her separation agreement.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you feel like, because I'm seeing a lot of companies now, I have friends right now that they've been really going through the gamut, like applying for jobs, and some of them have applied for like hundreds of positions, and they constantly go through interviews, and they're telling me about some of this stuff because clearly I used to do recruiting. So I guess they feel like, hey, can I bounce this idea off you? And I'm like, I haven't been a recruiter in so many years. I don't know how much help I'll be, but from what a lot of them are talking about too, like the job description, they'll have a lot of things here with diversity and inclusion. And do you feel like that has helped companies kind of bring in the people that would fit in well with the company culture? Do you feel like that is even playing a role, or do you feel like it might be making it worse in some cases?
I think DEI is a good thing
Hmm.
overall because especially when you have government regulators, at least prior to Trump, who are very onerous in terms of trying to get companies to be more DEI oriented. And
Hmm.
so, you would have agencies like civil rights organizations like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission were basically mandating that companies have like, certain numbers of, diverse people, whether it's blacks, Hispanics, disabled, females, LGBTQ plus, whatever.
Hmm.
So I mean, I think it's helpful to that extent. Where you end up with problems is when it's obvious that you're like, it's discrimination, that you're not going to hire somebody because we can't use a disabled person right now. We have to have more people of color or something like
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
And so, and it's to some extent a numbers game, but it's also what's called disparate treatment, where basically you may have a facially neutral practice that tends to disproportionately impact against, certain classes, protected classes of people.
Hmm.
And so I see a lot of that where basically companies are scrambling to try to uphold this sort of philosophy without really understanding how this philosophy works, especially when it comes to these facially neutral practices that tend to disproportionately impact against people, minorities, protected classes. You see it a lot more like in selection instruments.
Mhm.
It could be intelligence or personality tests, things like that.
Yeah.
So,
And, so for example, a lot of people who listen to the show are attorneys, but we do have some people who come and find the show and they're listening. And perhaps somebody's listening to this episode right now and they're thinking, you know what, I've been thinking about, I'm having an issue with my employer. I'm having some, whatever the case may be. And they're thinking, I need to talk to an attorney. How, because I know sometimes too attorneys, and I've always been a very big advocate. I'm like, look, if you need an employment law attorney, you need to find somebody that specializes in that, because I know sometimes attorneys will, hey, I do civil litigation. They
dabble.
list all, yeah, they do a laundry list of things. How important is it? Like, would you recommend to somebody if they're looking for an attorney or even an attorney that wants to start handling employment law? Because again, everybody has to start out somewhere, but do you feel like on the person who's hiring side, go with a specialist, and then if somebody wants to specialize in this, what advice would you give to that attorney?
Uh, well, all right. So I think you have to take a step back. I believe that sometimes talent can trump experience,
Hmm.
right? So, I mean, there are people out there who are extremely talented and, they'll start out in the field and they could be very good. They could be as good, if not better, than people with 25 years of experience like myself.
Hmm.
That's maybe, though, maybe 20%, at most, maybe 20% of all professionals.
Hmm.
All right. Now, if you need that experience, you're going to need to get that somewhere.
Hmm.
And I think just taking on cases ad hoc or randomly is not probably not going to be the best idea. It's probably not going to be best for the client. So you have to be careful to some extent. I've dabbled in other areas too because clients will ask me a la carte wise, to take on something. Oddly enough, 10 years ago, I handled a wrongful death case of a 4-year-old girl
Hmm.
because my client really asked me, they asked me to take it on, and I was the third attorney to handle this. Now, I was successful in it,
Hmm.
and the prior two attorneys weren't. And, so it's just sometimes it's weird. I don't want to say like, I'm superior or anything like that, or I'm supremely talented, but, I know that sometimes talent can trump experience, but I think the two have to I think it's best when the two are in balance with one another. So I don't if somebody's switching, making a big switch from like tax law, which is very structured, very highly regulated, to employment, which I think can accommodate more entrepreneurial minded attorneys, I think then that person needs to really get a grip on the entrepreneurial aspect of it, or the more communicative aspect of employment law relative to tax law, which may be less communicative or
Hmm.
less communication oriented. So and tax law I think is more math, and I'm not math oriented myself. So
Yeah. Now, you've built your practice almost entirely through like networking, board service, or serving on boards, and then, of course, just community service that you're doing. What advice would you give to professionals who want to grow their practice, or maybe they're thinking about going out on their own without relying on that traditional marketing?
I mean, in short, when other people are saying zig, you should zag.
Hmm.
And I think you have to figure it out for yourself. A lot of it is intuitive. I do my own PR. I do all my own marketing. A lot of people say when you're trying to do everything, you're a master of nothing. That
Hmm.
type of thing. I don't think that's true. Um, I mean, and this is where AI and the internet and technology comes in.
Hmm.
All this technology has made practicing law so much easier. I mean, there's no way I could run my practice the way I do now 30 years ago. I mean,
Hmm.
internet and social media and AI and all this stuff has just made practicing so much easier. A more concrete example, something that maybe 25, 30 years ago would take me 3 hours of research now takes me like, an hour at most.
Hmm.
So I use LexisNexis, and prior to that I had Westlight subscriptions of those,
Hmm.
and it just saves so much time. And the internet itself, I mean, AI, there's stuff I could look. I don't need maybe half the stuff I'm researching. I could just look up on AI. Now
Hmm.
the problem is that if you're blindly trusting AI, I think you're going to end up in trouble. I mean, you have to understand how to vet this stuff.
Hmm.
So due
And
diligence, whatever.
exactly. And it's almost like I say treat it like a draft. or like a redlined agreement that it's redlined and you still need to go through it. But you're right about AI, and I think too from a marketing perspective or just even creating content for an attorney, like myself personally, I will take a script and say, hey, I want create an Instagram reel for me. And this is what I want to talk about, this
Yeah.
particular color and this, and it'll give it the script. And within 2 minutes, I have everything's ready to go. It's already done.
Yeah.
Where it used to be, it would take me an hour or so to put that together. And yeah, so I think AI is a great tool. And you touched on PR, because obviously, like you said, you handle your own PR. Can you share how that's impacted your practice and what tips or guidance you'd give to other attorneys? Because I'll tell you, as a growth tool, I think everybody needs to do it. But what I hear from attorneys that want, like, oh, Kerry, I want to schedule my episode, but I don't have time, And so, what would you say to that?
All right. So the first time I was contacted by the media for anything was about 24, 23 years ago. And that was by Business Week.
Mm-hmm.
And they found me on the internet. I was like one of the first attorneys to have a blog, and especially in employment law. So I was out there. I mean, if you searched like HR law, there'd be like 50 million hits, and I would be number one or two on
Mm-hmm.
Google. That's not the case anymore, by the way. But anyway, I got contacted by Business Week because of that, and they asked me a series of questions. And some of the questions, they disagree. Well, not they. Some of the other sources they interviewed, attorneys, I said X and they said Y. I
Mm-hmm.
said, well, don't take my word for it. Let's contact one of my clients. And they contacted one of my clients, and my client agreed with me and said, this is how it should be. If Chuck says X, then X is right.
Mm-hmm.
And they ended up publishing the article, quoting me, but also having like a half-page photo of him in it and all that. And I realized then that the media and the practice of law in general, it's a wide open field. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
not closed off. It's not that provincial or anything like that. And so I think when you put yourself out there and you're not afraid to disagree with what other attorneys say,
Mm-hmm.
it's not that hard to be successful. I was interviewed, I think, 3 or 4 times on a recruiting podcast show, and my first interview with them on the podcast, it was like a wild type of show, a lot of joking and things like that. And they said, they asked me about something about recruiters impersonating business executives or something like that in order to get past the gatekeepers to get information. And they asked me if it was illegal. And I said, well, in most situations, probably like 75% of situations, no. They said, well, but this attorney said that it is, absolutely. I said, I think you ought to look at the law itself and blah, blah, blah. And we started discussing it more. And I, brought up the law that they were talking about. And I was right. And
Mm-hmm.
so, when, and I'm not right all the time, but the point is that I think you have to put yourself out there
Mm-hmm.
and not be afraid of taking chances like that. So now, I've been interviewed internationally, like on a South Korean network. I guess the equivalent of CNN has interviewed me 5 times on their program. That was during the pandemic. And so, I get contacted all the time by the media, and I get quoted, cited, asked for, video, audio, print. And it's not that hard to get out there. I mean, I found you through Quoted, right?
Mm-hmm. You're right.
And I've been successful with them maybe, I don't know, at least half the time on stuff that I've responded to. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you put yourself out there, because a lot of firms, they're very structured. I'm very entrepreneurial, and a lot of firms are very structured. And the bureaucracy you have to deal with in order to get yourself out into the media is just overwhelming and probably not even worth it to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think a lot of large firms themselves really understand the media or how it works. Not that I have like a full 100% understanding of it myself, but I mean, I've been quoted and cited literally hundreds of times. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
on there on my website. And I've done hundreds of webinars and presentations, speaking engagements, all that. So you have to really not be afraid to put yourself out there.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing with litigation. I mean, talking with judges and other attorneys in court and all that. I'm not bragging, but I mean, I've yelled at other attorneys in front of the judge and in front of their clients. And I realized early on that if I'm yelling for a legitimate reason, I'm being sincere, and I'm not acting, not putting on a show, they'll let me go and they won't
Mm-hmm.
stop me,
Yeah.
especially if I'm calling out unprofessional or inappropriate conduct.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to put yourself out there and to some extent, just let it go.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you
And
have anger problems, maybe that's not the best tactic, but
yeah, that's true. That's true.
yeah.
So, for attorneys that are looking to maybe go out on their own, start their own firm, is there something that you're like, gosh, I wish I would have known this when I first started? Like, if you had to fill in that blank, what would it be?
Well, I think I just kind of laid it out there. I mean, put yourself out there and take those chances.
Hmm.
Um, Failing, I mean, you're going to fail. Everybody fails. I don't win all my cases.
Yeah.
I think I win maybe at least, I probably win about two-thirds of my cases. And the ones that I haven't won, they're devastating. I take it very personally because I'm a sole practitioner, but I mean, it's not the end of the world either. And I've lost case. I mean, I've lost verdicts, but came off really good on damages. So it's
Hmm.
like it could sometimes be a mixed bag. And, you have to take a chance. I mean, I've done trials all by myself without paralegals and all that. I've gone up against, firms or cases where the other side had literally three or four attorneys. I'm the only guy on my side, and I came off better than they did.
Hmm.
So, maybe it's to some extent confidence too, but you could also fake confidence.
Hmm.
That's why they call them confidence men.
Yeah.
They have a lot of confidence and they are able to sucker other people into taking confidence in them or being confident in them. So
And as you know, the show is called Chromatic Counsel, and I always love to ask all of my guests this. So I always like to ask, do you have certain colors or wardrobe pieces that you gravitate towards when you have to go to court or a high stakes environment? Or maybe, if you do mediation, I don't know how often you go, but do you have certain colors that you're like,
do
yeah, this
mediation
is my
offers,
power suit or this is my lucky suit or I always do well when I wear this specific color?
blue and secondarily gray. By the
Mhm.
way, I'm legally colorblind.
Oh, really?
So
Wow.
yeah. So I dress by memory,
Mm,
is how I do it. So but blue is easy for me,
mhm.
and especially like in Chicago with the lake, which is blue and all that. So it's nice. But yeah, and people always told me I look best in blue. So
Hmm. And I love always, that's always been my trade thing. Like blue, that's a trust building color. I'm like, I love blue. That's like, you can't go wrong with that. And gray's my secondary too. I wore gray today. So for any business owners that are listening today, what is one proactive step that they can take to kind of reduce that workplace risk before a problem arises? And I know that that's probably a Pandora's box question right there, because could be so many things. But what's one thing that you would say to them?
have written job descriptions and policies. You don't need an encyclopedia for policies and job descriptions. A job description can be a simple paragraph, and the policies can be a few pages, or something like that. And just have those and follow them.
Hmm.
I think some structure, regardless of how entrepreneurial you are, is
Hmm.
going to help. Because a lot of my clients are small to medium-sized businesses and they're very entrepreneurial, and they appreciate the fact that I'm a sole practitioner, but they also appreciate the fact that I'm like criticizing or constructively criticizing them when they don't have these policies and job descriptions and procedures. Because I think, like I said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I figure my estimate it's going to cost three times as much for me to clean it up on the back end than it is on the front end for them to
Hmm.
do it right on the front end.
Yeah. And I know there's a lot of companies out there like, for not ADT, ADP, for the payroll company or paychecks where they'll have like an HR section of their service where it's like, oh, here's all the templates. Do you feel those are good to have to start with, or they should be writing their own, like from scratch?
I think those resources are good to start with, but you still have to vet them.
Hmm.
I mean, it's still a good idea to have those vetted because, in all honesty, middle of last year, I took over a case for a client of mine. I was the second attorney on it, and they had two attorneys prior to me. And this was a biometric information privacy act case, and they're very expensive. And it could have been a very costly class action case. And the whole reason why they got the biometric, why they started using biometric information scanning, fingerprint scanning or eye scanning and that stuff, was because they got sold on it by their payroll company. And I
Hmm.
asked the CEO, I'm like, why are you even using this stuff? And she's like, well, we got locked into it. And we settled the lawsuit. I settled it for less than what what the prior attorneys thought they would have to settle it for. And I was successful with it and all that, but it could have been avoided by not even gathering biometric data when they didn't need it. It's not a sophisticated enough business like maybe running a nuclear reactor. that's
Mhm.
I'm sorry, a sophisticated business where maybe biometric scanning may be useful because you don't want people punching in and out for each other. But in the environment that I was dealing with for that one client, it just wasn't necessary. And so vetting, I think proper vetting would have helped a lot.
Mhm.
I think vetting on
Absolutely.
anything, I mean, due diligence. I'm always beating to death the whole concept of due diligence.
Mhm.
That just do some, it doesn't take hours to conduct successful due diligence, but, you know, maybe talk about it with your own attorney or some other professional and then make the decision, but at least research it. Just don't jump at it.
Yeah. And it makes me think back when years ago when I worked for two attorneys. I worked as a legal assistant. Again, this was a long time ago, but I remember him telling me, it was a husband and wife team, but I remember him telling me, we always make sure our I's are dotted, our T's are crossed, because I can't remember exactly how he said it, but sometimes that's where your case is. The devil's in the details. And like
Oh,
you
yeah.
said, doing that due diligence and checking, double checking, even triple checking sometimes is a good thing to do. Yeah. So, in closing, Chuck, is there anything you'd like to share with our listening audience? Anything you have coming up? Any speaking engagements or media announcements you'd like to make? Or
I was just published yesterday in a National Law Review article regarding recruitment and hiring practices. So that just came out. I was published a few weeks ago in an AI related article on AI and the law. That was pretty cool.
oh,
I always have webinars coming up. I moderate a series of 7 webinars a year on
mhm.
HR and employment law practices, things like that. So, those are through Financial Poise, that's the company. And uh, so, I just want to hammer home to people, whether it's your attorney or just a business owner, do your due diligence and research on something before jumping at it. It could potentially save you so much time and money. And also, I see if you're a business owner, have payroll records. I can't tell you how many times I deal with businesses who don't have payroll records, and it's just crushing. I mean, the cost of litigation of resolving that could just be crushing to a business.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I'm so glad that you were able to take time out of your schedule to join us. It was an
Well,
absolute
thank you for
pleasure.
having me.
Absolutely. And I have links in the show notes. So if anybody would like to get a hold of Chuck and talk with him, click on any of the links below. And I am so glad that you were able to join us all today. That is a wrap for this episode of Chromatic Counsel. And I hope you can tune in next time. If what Chuck shared with you helps you and resonates, please click on the like button, click subscribe so you know when we drop our next episode. And as always, I am wishing you continued success.